Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our SEAC meeting for Thursday, June 16th, 2022. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that the Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, live, and learn. The DDSB Human Rights and Equity Statement is as follows. The Durham District School Board is committed to learning environments that are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, free from discrimination, while placing human rights and equity at the center. Okay, we'll move on now to our roll call, starting with Autism Ontario.
Present, Sensor Renev for Autism Ontario.
Thank you. Black Parent Support Group.
I'm here.
Lewis, present.
Okay, both of us are here.
Thank you. Durham Down Syndrome Association.
Clara Kelly, present.
Thank you. Early Years Consortium. Nobody yet for the early years. Easter Seals Ontario.
Christina Salisbury, Easter Seals.
Thank you. Learning Disabilities Association of Durham Region.
Good evening, Rowan Jarvis, present.
Thank you. Member at Large McLennan, Carolyn McLennan.
Carolyn McLennan, present.
Thank you. Member at Large Donna.
Donna Bean, present.
Thank you. Ontario Association for Families of Children with Communication Disorders.
Hi, Kelly Kennedy, present.
Thank you. Voice for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Children.
Kathy Keaty, present.
Thank you. Elementary Administration Reps.
Rima Sachi, Vice Principal at Crothers Creek.
Thank you.
And Shannon Robertson, Principal at Weston Heights, present.
Great, thank you. Secondary Administration Reps.
Anthony Phelan from Pickering High School.
Thank you. Trustees.
Donna Edwards from Town of Ajax, Ward 3.
Thank you.
Christine Thatcher, Whitby Trustee.
Thank you. And staff.
We'll go to the system leads, please, first.
Kyla McKee, System Lead, Inclusive Student Services.
Okay.
Michelle Crawford-Eade, System Lead, Inclusive Student Services.
Thank you.
Connor Jenkinson, System Lead, Inclusive Student Services.
And Andrea McCauley, Superintendent for Inclusive Student Services.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we did receive regrets from Darlene Forbes, and Christine Thatcher has stepped in. Thank you for that. We will move on then to the approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with the agenda? No? Okay. Donna?
I was just going to motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve. Perfect. Thank you. Any seconders? Tara Kelly, all in favor? Okay. Agenda approved. Okay, moving on then to the approval of the minutes from May 19th, 2022. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? And are there any questions with respect to those minutes? No? Can we get a motion to approve the minutes then from the May 19th, 2020 meeting? Kathy Keaty, a seconder? Tara Cully, all in favor? Okay, minutes are passed. Then we will move on to now the staff report, starting with the administration report.
Thanks so much. So the administrative report for this month has a focus in appreciation, as many of the updates for consultation are embedded across the SEAC agenda, including conversations about the inclusive design grade 9 and our SEAC survey planning for the survey that we're going to roll out during the 22-23 school year. The DDSB special education plan for the 22-23 school year was recently shared with trustees as part of the standing committee on June 6th. Consultation with Siac on the special education plan is built into our agenda at key times of the year, just for those of you that have tiered in through the year, welcoming onto committee, which is great. Feedback on the plan, programs, and services, though, is welcome throughout the year. So anytime any of the organizations had feedback, always happy to meet and or make sure it goes on the SEAC agenda as a key topic of your consultation advisory to the board. Our teams advocate for children and youth in many ways, and we most often do that in partnership. A report by the Canadian Institute for Health Information, or CIHI, was released last month in May and showed a nearly 60% increase in hospitalizations for youth with eating disorders, particularly among girls aged 10 to 17, with the data coming in between March 20 and March 2021. Currently in the Durham region, there are no adolescent day treatment programs for eating disorders, and this is set to change effective for September. So working with Ontario Shores, one of our Grove or Education Community Partnership Program partners, we are expanding the partnership with them. We currently have 4 classes and we will be going to 5, as we just received in the last couple of weeks, approval to support the addition of an outpatient program that will be led through the Adolescent Mental Health Unit on site at Ontario Shores, just in South Whitby at their facility. And so we thank our partner, Ontario Shores, as well as the Ministry of Education, for supporting with funding for a teacher who will be embedded in the program that will be aimed for youth ages kind of grades 7 to 12 who will be accessing that outpatient program. So that's tremendous, as we certainly see that data play out locally. So really important support for our kids. Wellbeing, mental health, and special education supports are once again infused into summer programming this summer. Students accessing summer learning will have access to professionals in the roles such as CERT, educational assistant, and other roles that support accommodation as part of the base programming options. These include, but are not limited to, secondary credit opportunities, grade 8 to grade 9 transition program, elementary literacy, elementary math camps, outdoor education, as well as our early years focus programs. From a special education perspective, Teach Town, which is run through the school year as an after-school program for either autistic individuals or individuals with autism, and led from the Autism Resource Team, continues through the summer. And then this year, we have also partnered with the Ability Center to provide 2 4-week therapeutic recreation programs at the center. The program will be facilitated by Ability Services staff and include educational assistance support for self-care. We are thrilled that the program registration is now full, and all of the aforementioned programs are provided cost-free to students and their families. Our mental health services team have also put together a plan for this summer that leaves opportunity for individual continuity of service, non-emergency availability of connection with our through coverage on the button on our website, as well as update to the mental health resources under that tab. Community partners have collaborated on a 24/7, so full availability emergency mental health line that families and youth can access. And those partners include Chimo, Frontenac, and Kinark. And what I will do just after the admin report is post that information in the chat so that you are able to grab that tonight. So really important. It's 310 COPE, and we'll get that into the chat box. And I believe we shared the flyer with you as well. And then finally, with June comes transitions, not only for students, but for many of our team members as well. So this evening, we have a few thank yous that we'd like to give. So retiring members of our Inclusive Student Services team. So these include individuals who are in school-based roles, such as educational assistants, CERTs, special education class teachers, or district staff in the roles such as hearing resource teacher or a member of our clinical teams, such as a social worker. Each of these retiring members has made a difference and impact on students, and we just want to thank everybody across those roles. Of specific note, Joanne Doherty, currently Vice Principal of Grove School, is retiring at the end of this month as well. And we welcome Russell Davidson to the administration team at Grove. Some of our SEAC members will recognize Russ's name as he was a member of the DSAA Liaison Committee for a number of years. Joanne has dedicated most of her educational career to students and youth who thrive in alternate education and need wraparound programs, whether through Grove, Durham Continuing Education, or through our secondary schools. So we just give a shout out and a thank you to Joanne as she makes that transition at the end of the month. Also, too, of note, our partner on screen, completing 5 years as system lead for Inclusive Student Services, Kyla transitions to the role of principal at Clara Hughes Public School. Kyla has coached, led, and inspired teams both in schools and at the district level and shifted programming and services to continually improve them for students and families. Kyla would say that she is the fortunate one to be moving into the Clara Hughes community for the incredible kids, families, and staff there. But I would say that they are fortunate as well, as Kyla brings her leadership founded on a commitment to collaboration, well-being, and mental health, and learning all wrapped together, and a heart that truly finds each person's excellence. We thank families, caregivers, and staff across all roles, most importantly students, for the privilege of being part of their supports. And I'll leave the thank you to Siac as it's embedded in the department report and being shared by the system leads. This is our admin report for June 22. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Congratulations, Kyla, and we will definitely miss you. Thank you for all your work you've done here on SEAC. Much appreciate that. Do we have any questions for Andrea with respect to the administration report? No? Okay, then we will move on to the board report with Donna. Go ahead.
Thank you. We also had our standing committee, we had a presentation around the Student Voice Initiative. Basically, it was a collective effort between staff and our student trustees to collect voice, particularly focusing on those voices that are not usually heard on basically challenges and inequities that they may have found with the Durham District School Board programs and services. And they are just at this time going through the assessment analysis of that information. And it will be provided, a further report will be provided on that Student Voice Initiative later in the fall. We also had a presentation, of course, on the First Nations, Métis and Inuit grade 11 English course, as far as a mandatory course that has come forward. Of course, the spec ed plan that Andrea had mentioned. And we also had the Memorandum of Understanding with the Durham Region Transit, where we've come up where if we buy bulk passes, depending on the amount, we get a discounted rate, which is a great opportunity to increase, hopefully, availability for a variety of transportation methods for our students. We also had to have a special board meeting because of, most of you might know that we had one resignation, and then Patrice Barnes, who my counterpart in Ajax, was a successful MPP elect for the town of Ajax. So we had to fill those two positions. We did have interviews today, and the results of that will happen at the Monday board meeting. We attended again, a retirement event for staff, and that's for all staff members that have retired really in the last 3 years because of COVID. We really hadn't anything. So there was over 600 staff members that have retired in the last basically 3 years. And it was just an event to, again, thank staff members for their service to the Durham District School Board, It's amazing how many happy faces, big smile faces we saw as they entered. Some of them had already been retired for a couple of years, but again, it was a really great event to see. And oh yeah, we had our special board meeting. As I said, we had to, again, we also found out that our director of education is retiring at the end of December. So we had to set up our hiring committee, do some replacements of alternates of members that sat on a variety of cares. So that's why Christine is here as one of our alternates. And thank goodness she could come in place for Darlene. And we still have a few vacancies that will have to happen. And on Monday, it's good. Our next board meeting on the 20th will be a very busy, where we'll looking at passing our budget. Again, I think it's going to be a busy summer for our board. I think that's about it.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Donna with respect to the board report? No? Okay, thank you. We are going to move on then to our presentation regarding inclusive design grade 9 with Nicole.
Sorry, Eva, the department report's going to lead into that.
Oh, is the department report going to lead into that? Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
So we saw a return on June 3rd for our elementary educational assistants to some in-person learning, which was a nice return to see some of them. All of our elementary EAs participated in 2 half-day sessions, one being a keynote session that was put on as a collaboration between Inclusive Student Services as well as our academic services and curriculum teams, and with our equity team as well. Looking at how our duty bearer responsibilities as well as students' rights and responsibilities, and an introduction to our DDSB human rights policy as well. And for other EAs, they had the chance, if they had not recertified any of their physical components for BMS, as well as any of their other components, such as a refresher for BMS, or if they need a full day for BMS training, that they were able to partake in that. And then if they had those already completed, they had a couple of other sessions where they could have participated in, including some of our EA2s who had the opportunity to sit and plan as a team and work together around how they can look at programming and supporting the system next year, as well as some of our early years. Our early years department, we partnered with them as an Inclusive Student Services department and had them present some amazing, they've done incredible work around the Great Beginning series that were extremely well attended across the system by a lot of our families, and they were actually able to take half a day and combine 2 of the wonderful sessions from Dr. Clinton as well as from the Merit Institute, and put that into a session for any of our EAs, elementary EAs, who were interested in any of the early years programming. So again, it was a great day. We had lots of amazing attendance and lots of people who found some great value in what was happening. It was nice to see a little bit of that return to some of that in-person learning as well.
And just to draw your attention to our Sia Training update, our Inclusive Tech team has been hard at work once again this year, and you'll see on the screen some stats about the number of students, teachers, and support staff that have been supported with developing skills and the use of technology to support learning. Our devices continue to include a number of accessibility tools built right in, particularly on the Chromebook. And with training, it allows students to do things like record their voices, change text to support reading challenges, have text read to them, change backgrounds on the screen to make the text more visible, to support those needs, and many, many more things. Partner this standard feature with other programs like Google Read and Write licenses, BoardMaker, Book Creator, Google Keep, and Google Documents and Slides, and you get just a small sampling of the many accommodations being provided through the Inclusive Tech team. We know that in order to support students in leveraging their technology to achieve their full potential, the staff around them, along with, in many cases, their families, also need this training. Students can have multiple training sessions when they're learning. They can have a revisit training date later on to come back and either learn new aspects of the software or to just revisit if they've forgotten a few things, and have the learning grow with them, introducing new tools as they are ready. For some, these sessions are still being held virtually. For others, in-person training has made sure that they're sitting right beside the trainer and able to ask questions and gain some support. This is an important support that we know will continue and really supports a number of students across the system. And again, this is only a snapshot in terms of the many other ways technology is being leveraged. We know that in many of our classes, this is just a regular occurrence for all students at the point of learning and at the point of instruction. And we're going to hand it off to our team for the presentation.
Hi there. So it's with a great honor that I introduce a team with me today. We know that ending streaming is a priority to improve student pathways and create equitable outcomes for students. To give us an update on DDSB's grade 9 inclusive courses tonight, we have Nicole Delaby, she's the program facilitator, Carolyn Ty and Connor Calhoun, inclusive grade 9 coaches, and Laura Lee, student success pathway counselor. So I'll hand it off to Nicole.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. So we really hope that the presentation this evening is going to provide you with a little bit more information on the inclusive grade 9 courses and the supports that we've been providing to students and our teachers. As we know, the Ministry of Education and the Durham District School Board is committed to addressing systemic discrimination and breaking down the barriers for our Indigenous, Black, and racialized students, our students from low-income households, students with disabilities, and our students with special education needs. And as a mom of 2 kids with autism, this is really something that's near and dear to my own heart. In the Durham District School Board, we've introduced the umbrella term, inclusive grade 9, to complement the ministry mandates and continue the work that we've been doing as a system to create more equitable opportunities and outcomes for our students, to increase engagement, and to contribute to the overall success of our students. So as of September of 2022, our students will no longer be streamed into academic or applied level courses in grade 9. Instead, they're going to be taking a combination of courses, including inclusive destreamed, inclusive academic, inclusive open, and in some cases, inclusive locally developed. And these courses are grounded in best practices such as universal design for learning, culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, and differentiated instruction and assessment. I'd like to turn it over to Laura, who's going to talk a little bit in more detail about this.
Thank you. The Inclusive Grade 9 program is a continuation of our recent thinking around pathways and expanding upon our Choosing My Success initiative. This will provide students and families with another year to make decisions around their pathways, including those identified into a small class placement as part of their IPRC. As of September 2022, students will no longer be streamed into academic or applied level courses in grade 9. Instead, they will take a combination of courses made up of de-streamed, inclusive grade 9, and open level courses. De-streaming began this year with the grade 9 mathematics curriculum. The Ministry of Education is expanding the de-streamed course offerings for the 2022-2023 school year and is implementing a new de-streamed science course. This means that the course codes for both grade 9 academic and applied science will be retired at the end of the 2021-2022 school year. Other than in particular situations where a student may be accessing certain locally developed curriculum, grade 9 math and science will only be offered as de-streamed. In addition to taking the 2 de-streamed courses, students will take inclusive academic courses for English, geography, and French in grade 9. Inclusive academic refers to courses that use the academic course curriculum with the goal of increasing equitable outcomes and pathways for all students. If a student will be continuing in the French immersion program in grade 9, there will be inclusive grade 9 French immersion courses available for some subjects. Other than in particular situations where a student may be accessing certain locally developed curriculum, English, geography, and French will only be offered as academic. As the Ministry of Education is retiring the applied course codes for English, Geography, and French at the end of this school year, there are no applied level grade 9 courses. For some students, their elementary administrator, grade 8 teacher, special education teacher, or inclusive student services facilitator may have recommended that they take inclusive grade 9 locally developed courses in math, English, or science. These options still exist for students who would traditionally have taken locally developed courses. We already have inclusive open subject courses at the grade 9 level, such as the arts, business studies, health and physical education, social sciences and humanities, and technological education. What courses are offered varies between schools. French is one of the compulsory credits required to earn the OSSD. The FSF 1.0 course is meant for students who have never taken French or have very limited opportunities to engage with French in the elementary school. For our students who are in special class placements, they may be working towards a certificate of accomplishment by taking K-level courses. These are alternative non-credit courses for students with special education needs that are designed to support the growth of fundamental skills, independence, and self-care. The expectations for these courses are individualized and outlined on a student's IEP. Several opportunities were provided to support students and families during the course selection process. The 6 Choosing My Success grade 7 and 8 transition pathway counselors supported all grade 8 students, including those at DDSB at home, through classroom visits, one-on-one or small group conferences, and partnering with our colleagues in the ISS, Indigenous, and ESL, ELD departments as required. The CMS counselors also hosted online drop-in sessions for students and families and provided one-on-one support such as emails, phone calls, and both virtual and in-person meetings with families. We also partnered with the ISS department on January 13th for their annual grade 8 to grade 9 transition event, where over 100 participants attended and learned about the transition from grade 8 to grade 9 and the new inclusive grade 9 program. To support all grade 8 students and their families with course selection, the guidance facilitator and the CMS counselors hosted a virtual event on March 29th, in which over 900 participants attended. This was another opportunity for students and families to learn about the new inclusive grade 9 program, the Choosing My Success resources, and the process for selecting courses in My Blueprint. Since there are many questions about the course changes in grade 9, a new 6-page resource, What Families Want to Know About De-Streaming and Inclusive Grade 9, was created to provide an overview of de-streaming, the inclusive grade 9 program, information about locally developed courses, and supports available in grade 9. This resource was shared with families and is available on the DDSB website under Programs and Learning.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to be speaking to supports for educators. My name is Carolyn Ty. I'm one of the instructional inclusive grade 9 course coaches. And Colin and myself have been working in this role since February. In terms of supports that we have been providing for educators, there is a de-streaming resource article bank that we have shared out with 2 teams in the schools. And that has been shared with teachers as just some background information for them in regards to de-streaming, the why and the how. In addition to that, our entire team in the curriculum department has created centrally professional development that has been pushed out to secondary schools and has been delivered in those schools to their teachers. Some was done in February, and there is some additional PD that's being pushed out to schools for the end of the school year to get them ready for the inclusive grade 9 courses that are going to be happening in the fall. In addition to the PD that has been happening and that has been pushed out, Colin and myself have been working with schools with, first of all, their inclusive grade 9 teams. So we have school-specific inclusive grade 9 teams that include a series of teachers. Some of them are from open classes, some of them are teaching the grade 9 stream, bringing their expertise to the table and working with our English teachers, geography teachers, and science teachers in order to get them ready for the inclusive courses coming up in the fall. In addition to our school-based teams, we also have subject-specific inclusive grade 9 teams. So we have set up inclusive grade 9 teams for geography, subject special teachers, science, English, and math. We've incorporated them just to continue to build on the strategies that they're currently using in their D-stream classes. And so we're bringing all of those voices together across our entire board so that teachers can have conversations about the inclusive grade 9 courses, and we can sort of disseminate the information out. In these workshops that we've been running with our in-school teams and subject-specific teams, our focus has been on ideology and having teachers considering their own ideologies and working towards discussions about universal design for learning, what the CAS guidelines are, how they sort of would lead into our pedagogy and inform our assessment practices. And in addition to that, we've been looking at culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy and how that can also inform our instructional practices and our assessments and evaluation within our classrooms. In addition, if there are have been teachers who are interested in working specifically with Colin and myself, or with Colin and myself and the subject-specific facilitators or coaches in our department, we've been supporting teachers with that as well. In addition to the supports we've been providing in school, there are supports that are provided on the Learning Hub, Professional Learning Hub in our DDSB site. There is a school-based inclusive grade 9 course on the hub, and you can see the image. That's the 5th image there. And there are live links with sort of instructional pieces in there that can help inform teachers if they're interested in finding out more information about the inclusive grade 9 courses. There are subject-specific courses on the hub. There are teaching tools for inclusive academic English. There is the new grade 9 D-Stream math course resources. That was created last summer by a writing team, and that is available on the Professional Learning Hub. And there are all sorts of resources in there that connect to assessment, pedagogy, all of those things that are important for our inclusive grade 9 courses. In 2023, our goal is to provide in-person professional development, planning, and support with teachers through release time. We're hoping that release time will be available. We've sort of made that work by releasing teachers and being in our classrooms to support in that way at this point in time, but hopefully there will be some release time available and we'll continue the work with those teachers. The last thing I want to speak about is an inclusive grade 9 toolkit. So the curriculum department and all the courses involved have created a toolkit that will be sent out to secondary schools at the end of June. That contains a series of resources that can be used in the inclusive grade 9 courses, that can provide information to teachers to support them as they're planning for their inclusive grade 9 courses. So some of the things, there's the unlearned poster packs, which have been made accessible to the teachers that we've purchased. A series of books are going to be made available: Cultivating Genius by Goldie Muhammad, Fresh Look at Grading, Reporting, and Quality Assessment in High Schools, which are Sandra Herbst's books. Then there's Making Thinking Visible, Anti-Racism and Universal Design for Learning, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and White Women Teaching Black Boys. Those are just some of the examples. The waterfall document from York Region that was produced is also going to be added to that the grade 9 toolkit and sent out. And then there are also some subject-specific resources that will be added into those kits for math, English, history, science, and geography. The science, especially to support the new STEM piece that is going to be involved from K to grade 9.
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Colin Calhoun, and along with Carolyn, I am the other inclusive grade 9 coach. And Carolyn forgot to toot our horn there in her section where we have been hired as of February of this year. We stepped into this brand new role. 2 new coaching positions were created in the curriculum department. And these These roles are specifically for helping to build capacity and facilitate teachers' transitions to these inclusive grade 9 spaces. So our job is from February through the end of this year, and then for the entire year next year, our job is to help work with these school teams and subject teams to facilitate their transition, their planning. And really, we have a three-pronged approach that's being developed here. We want to be looking at shifting ideology, so the belief systems that inform our instructional practices. We want to be shifting our pedagogy, our instructional methods to ensure that they match the outcomes and the desires of our inclusive programming. And we also want to focus on our assessment strategies to ensure that we are using equitable assessment strategies when it comes to assessing and evaluating all of our students. And in focusing on those three things, our ideology, our pedagogy, and our assessment strategies, we hope to be able to support all of our students in these inclusive spaces in the classroom. That's the big thing. So the question we often hear is how are we going to support our students within these inclusive grade 9 settings? How are we going to be able to support the diverse needs of all of our learners in these inclusive settings? And the number one answer, the focus is being able to provide those supports. Classroom teachers providing those supports within the classroom itself. And one of the key components of this is being able to understand and implement universal design for learning. Universal design for learning is a system that's been around for a while, research-based, has been shown to have great outcomes, and it's all about being able to anticipate, identify, and remove barriers that students have to learning in the planning stages. So it is a proactive system where we try to identify as much as possible what are some of the barriers that students are going to have that prevent them from accessing the learning, and we are removing those barriers in a universal way. So when we think of some of the accommodations that we provide to students, we might be providing accommodations at this point to certain students based on their individual needs. So we're changing lessons or we're changing assessments in ways that suit 1 or 2 students or 3 or 4 students. But what we want to be doing is understanding that if there's a barrier that exists for 1, 2, or 3 students in the classroom, why don't I remove that barrier universally? For example, if extra time for processing is required, is there a way that I can design my lesson or my instructional strategy so that I'm allowing extra time for processing universally? One of the other things we want to be able to do is provide multiple entry points for learning so that students can be engaged in their learning no matter where they are in terms of the skill set required to engage. So whether students are bringing a high level of background knowledge to a particular lesson or task and they feel ready to go and can hit the ground running right away, or whether students maybe have gaps in that background knowledge and some of that foundational learning and they need a bit more support, all of those students are still going to be able to engage with that topic, with that task, with that lesson, because teachers will be building into it multiple entry points for their learners. We also want to be able to provide a variety of different ways for students to learn and demonstrate their learning. And we want these to be authentic reflections of students' own learning styles and their preferences. And this ties into our culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. We want students to be able to draw upon their own expertise. We want to be able to celebrate each of our students for the genius that they bring to our classrooms. And we want to be able to allow them to differentiate the way that they express their learning and show us their learning. And in a more reactive way, although we try to remove as many barriers as we can in the planning stages proactively, there are going to come times where we have students that we have identified a gap in the midst of the learning. Maybe we weren't aware this gap was there. Maybe it's a gap that has only come about as the learning has progressed. And that's where differentiated instruction comes in. Differentiated instruction allows us to modify our instruction that's happening in that moment to meet the needs of learners and close gaps and address gaps within the classroom. So if a teacher identifies a group of students who need a particular, gap closing in a particular skill, they're able to structure their classroom in a way that they can use guided groups or heterogeneous grouping, parallel tasks, etc., to be able to work with those students, close those gaps. And so all of these things and many others are the ways that we are trying to build the capacity and build teachers' understanding of CRRP and UDL to ensure that the classrooms are designed from day one to meet the needs of all of the students. And so when we think about accommodating students, it's not just accommodations for students who have IEPs. It's not just providing those accommodations for those students, but trying to find ways to truly make those accommodations completely universal so that all students can kind of have that barrier-free experience that inclusive education is meant to represent. Within the school, of course, or within the classroom setting, there may be gaps, or there may be times that a classroom teacher isn't able to close a gap or address it within the classroom setting. And in those cases, we just need to leverage the supports that exist in our buildings. So there, of course, is the student success teams, our guidance teams, et cetera, can be pulled in. Our inclusive student services support teams can be pulled in. And there will also be things like access to tutoring next year that's being set up to allow students to be able to, or allow teachers rather, to be able to leverage supports within the building that can help to close those gaps and provide the education or inclusive education students need. So one of the questions that we often get asked is, okay, so what happens if students are struggling in grade 9? A question that we're often asked is, with the dissolution of Applied, if we have students that find themselves operating under the inclusive academic curriculum, what if they're struggling? What's going to be happening with those students? And what we want to try to design with our educators is classrooms that ensure that if there are gaps in understanding, or if students have struggles or areas of weakness, we want to be able to identify those quickly. And we also want to be able to make sure that once we've identified those gaps, we have our classroom structured in such a way that we're able to provide in the classroom itself the means to which we can help fill those gaps in a timely way. The goal is to be able to identify areas of concern and actively address them before these gaps are able to threaten the child's chances of their academic success. And as I was saying earlier, if gaps or supports are needed that go beyond the classroom, then where classroom-based interventions alone can't address them, we can involve our student success teams, our inclusive student services, our in-house tutoring that can be provided, et cetera, to try to fill those gaps. And one of the other hallmarks of CRRP is the establishing of meaningful connections with the home and the community. So what we're really going to be emphasizing in these inclusive classrooms is the development of meaningful and ongoing relationships between home and the teachers. So early and ongoing communication is going to be essential for ensuring academic success. Families are going to be encouraged to communicate directly with the subject teachers, and of course, the child's guidance counselors, academic resource teacher, vice principal, principal, all of these people will be brought in as sources of support as well. And the DDSB also offers summer school programming that focuses on numeracy or literacy fundamentals to help prepare students for high school. So some of the programs we offer are designed to help transition students from grade 8 to grade 9 to ensure that they are successful in our inclusive programming.
Thank you so much for that. It was a great presentation. I know we have a couple of questions in the chat. Sorry, just trying to open it up.
Michelle can facilitate that if you want.
Sure.
Okay, so let me just see here. A question was asked, will students be streamed in grade 10? And yeah, Colin answered, yes, grade 10 courses are remaining the same. Nicole provided a resource in terms of de-streaming and inclusive grade 9. Nicole, do you want to talk a little bit about this resource, or?
Sure.
Okay, great.
So as Laura mentioned, this is a brand new resource. It's about 6 pages in length, and it addresses a number of key questions that families have, such as, what is de-streaming? And what are the courses that are available? What do I do if my child is struggling? A really key question for our grade 8 families is, what if my child is recommended for locally developed? What are some of those questions that I should be asking at the school level? So those are some of the topics that it addressed.
Another question that was asked to the team is, can we clarify the difference between locally developed and inclusive locally developed?
So all of our grade 9 courses are now under the umbrella term of inclusive. So locally developed would have been what we called it prior to this, but we're now referring to all of our grade 9 courses using the term inclusive. So in terms of what the two look like prior locally developed to current locally developed, they're going to look similar because they're based on the individual needs of the child in that classroom. We're just calling it inclusive to bring it under that umbrella term for all of our grade 9 programs.
And I also think it connects to those pedagogy and assessment practices that we're bringing in to make things equitable for students. So including universal design for learning, the culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy, differentiated instruction. So by putting it underneath that broad category of inclusive, all of those supports will be available for students in all of the courses in grade 9, whether it's locally developed or de-streamed or academic or open.
Another question. After taking an inclusive de-streamed course in grade 9, what course would a student be prepared to take in grade 10?
So if a student is successful in their grade 9 inclusive course, then they would be able to take the academic course in grade 10. What we're doing is we're allowing students 1 extra year to kind of know themselves as learners, experience the high school system. They and their family support, home support, have a better sense of the structure of high school. And so they are then going to make their choice going into grade 10 about whether academic or applied is a fit for them. And that can be done in consultation, again, with their counselors and student success programs, et cetera. But what we are telling our educators and what we are telling our students and families is that success in the inclusive program means that that student has the capability to be successful in the academic program in grade 10. We want to keep the pathways as open as possible for our students for as long as possible. That's the goal of our de-streaming and our inclusive programming.
Okay. Next question. Who will be providing the tutoring for students if they need it?
So that is one where there's some flexibility. So the tutoring program is just kind of being built at this moment. So there are still some things being sorted out in terms of who the tutors will be next year. Some of the possible options, though, are using the student success roles in the school to offer tutoring. But other ideas that are being looked at are using senior level students as well to help leverage, more people in the building to be able to provide those supports. But those are things that are still being figured out at this point to be in place for next year.
Clara, go ahead.
Thanks. This is really good information in terms of what is there. The question I have is like universal design, like UDL, like that whole premise and concept is supposed to be ubiquitous throughout the entire school system in and itself. What is different or unique about this that this isn't? It seems like it's a new concept and it shouldn't be. But so what is it that? Where's the nuance that we're bringing into this process?
I think a lot of it has to do with bringing more awareness to teachers. So Universal Design for Learning should be already in our systems. We're just making sure that Universal Design for Learning is something that is now being incorporated, and we're sort of pushing that out. So that is, I would say, one of the big differences is there is specific training being done for UDL at this point.
And that's so in meetings and conversations with a lot of our educators, what we've been doing is helping to highlight with them many of the practices that they're using that already embed UDL. And what we're trying to do is just foreground those and really emphasize them. Because although UDL, is something that's been around for a while, we're just trying to help build that capacity and build the professional development of teachers. Because there are, ones on different pathways or different journeys towards being able to fully implement UDL in their classroom. So we're trying to get them to full implementation of the UDL in every classroom.
Andrew, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just think it's something that I agree, Tara, it's being talked about a lot in education. I don't think it's a promise we've yet delivered on in terms of that. So anytime we sort or cluster students, we're impacting pathways. So this is that commitment to grow and really be student focused, amplify student voice and choice. I think Colin spoke to that in terms of if a couple kids need it, it actually really is best practice. And now as well with the Indigenous education policy and our human rights policy, UDL takes on that identity as asset lens too, right? And that intersection of culturally responsive pedagogy with universal design, and you can't actually have one unless you have both, because they become synonymous and tied together in classrooms. So really looking at that and really questioning as well, where do we go to modifications? Where do we overgo to modifications, such as maintaining that through pathway? I think of our kids, think of, Learning Disabilities Association and some of the students, and how we go too quickly, I think, to modified kind of depth rather than focus on essentials, and then we maintain that, right? So what this says is, with the right supports, the majority of our kids should be successful, because if we offer true UDL and the adult wraparounds give that voice choice, practice, individualization, we shouldn't be limiting potential in ed. So I think it's a promise yet not realized. A lot of people say UDL. If you ask educators, what does that actually mean in practice? You would get a ton of different answers. And so really unifying what that means, but more than just talking to it, what does it look like and feel like in the classroom for the kids? And so part of the conversation on inclusive design grade 9 as well is the caution to our schools to not then create groupings that essentially are streaming without streaming's name. So if you have overrepresentation of, for instance, students with LD within a course section, you've actually streamed the kids again. And that, because we want to be Rowan, not to pull on the kids with LD, just that largest group, right? And we know that kids with LD were overstreamed into applied, and then that has pathway implications. So if the kids are clustered, we're essentially creating a streaming within a course that says it's not, and then we're actually negatively impacting the kids with another layer of barrier. So that's where the team that's on screen tonight, thank you to all 4 of you and Michelle, we need to live up to the promise of inclusive design on grade 9 because the foundations are there. Now we need to live up to it in what our kids experience in those classrooms.
Thank you, Andrea. Donna, and then Kathy.
Yeah, just to further on your concept about, Andrea, about providing more accommodations that not necessarily needed. I'm just wondering, now that we've got this streaming and people understand, there's the further training around UDL. I'm just Walton credits. In fact, having yes, I would like to see full credits, but I'm just wondering about those half credits that are very rarely given out, but is definitely achievable for some of our students from that perspective. So I'm just wondering if you could sort of, when you're talking about, UDL and stuff, is that focus of achieving not only a full credit, but maybe a half credit for some of our students.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I think that's something between the 2 teams we need to do a lot of discussion about and with our school administrators. Because sometimes the hesitancy in saying hit half the field is that half the field then becomes the goal. And so really, as we build this and implement it, the ultimate goal is credit achievement for our kids. But definitely you raise a good point for us to keep in mind. I certainly wouldn't want it front of mind, because then essentially we're streaming again. But where it's the benefit of the student. So that's something that we can take back to the interdepartment team that sits on that. I just wouldn't want it too much at the forefront, because then we start limiting expectations where we know the vast majority of our kids with the right supports will be highly successful in the program.
Yeah. And through Eva, I agree with that as far as, but it's just that the focus was either in full credit or nothing a lot of the time. So just that, is there that possibility of doing that a half credit as well? Because that means a lot.
Thank you, Donna. Kathy Keaty, and then Donna Edgeby.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate that we are de-streaming partially. And I always hesitate when we talk about it because those locally developed courses and how we staff them, how we support them is always near and dear. But I also always feel that there is an unwritten conversation here when we, some of the decisions we've made, that we're not talking about pathways in ways that are always going to honor them all. And when we say we're not going to have applied in grade 9, it's a suggestion that applied is bad. How we place children, how we label children, how we limit children is bad. But I'm wondering what the learning looks like to keep talking about the honor all pathways provide. That if you are moving to community living, how amazing that might be. And if you are going to the workplace, well, guess what? We have a workplace desperate for workers and you should be celebrated. And I think that when we're talking about this stuff, there tends to be an undercurrent of a bunch of university educated people saying, and universities where everybody should go because that's the best. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that looks, because quite frankly, we're labeling in a totally different way that has equal harm. If we had done applied the way it was intended, it might not have come out that way, but we blew it. I've taught de-streamed and I welcome it coming back, but it's in celebrating kids' success. So I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
I don't know, Nicole, if you want to take that one in terms of the Certificate of Achievement, OSSC, OSSD. And I'll just preface, absolutely, because I think those courses and including the conversation earlier around, I think Laura brought it up around the K courses, the non-credit, but making sure the diversity of breadth of learning that comes across those. So the developmental program tends to be based on the K courses, and what we do is chart it to make sure that kids aren't repetitious in their learning, because it is that who is the adult that's leaving us. I do think the advantage of the premise of inclusive design grade 9 is there's a big difference between a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 15-year-old. And this buys an additional year for a youth to actually have a strong sense of self before, essentially, like you said, Kathy, adults are making decisions. I would not want to be based on my 13-year-old self, right? And so pathways may have been different, right? So it just is that extra year of, and what happens when we have that extra year of growth, extra year of support, and we're not basing in two different systems, but certainly hear you. And I think to the credit of the student success team, and certainly our teams in ISS, we try, and every time there's a conversation about the Ontario Secondary School Diploma, we try and bring in the Ontario Secondary School Certificate and the Certificate of Achievement, not as like we even will, and I think all four members of the student success team on screen will call it out if people even try to stratify them as a hierarchy. They are across and all equivalent options, and how we get there is different, and how kids move and change in their pathways through secondary is really important. So that's where we see work education, the transition coordinators coming in, because we really need to differentiate the support in order to keep those conversations as broad as possible. But I don't know, Nicole, if you wanted to say anything about the different pathways and any of the ways that some of those other programs, like the specialist majors, kind of dubbed, how that kind of fits in with this, as we can kind of see a kid coming through secondary under the new model.
Absolutely. I'll just begin by apologizing. I have a little visitor with me, so if you hear some noises in the background, he's not doing so well with the fact that mom's not available right now. Just to echo what Andrea said, yes, we definitely reinforce with everyone that the OSSD and the OSSC and the Certificate of Accomplishment are just as valuable, that one isn't lesser than another, and that for our students who might begin in grade 9 in a locally developed course, that there's definitely a pathway for them to still get to those university level courses in grade 11 and 12 if they wish. It's just going to be a different pathway and a different journey than maybe their colleagues, than maybe their peers took. And so what we're doing at the guidance level and at the guidance table is making sure that we're all aware of lots of opportunities that the universities and the colleges and our employers are presenting for our students. So we're continually learning about what's available. Andrea had mentioned the Specialist High Skills Major program, and that's one that we're really valuing in our schools, and it's grown exponentially over the last few years. And it provides students the opportunity to explore different skilled trades and everything from automotive to nonprofit sectors. We've got an information technology one as well. And that's one, again, that values all of the different pathways. But really, it's just having those conversations with families and starting them early. And I know that Laura and the rest of the pathway counselors can attest to that, that oftentimes it's that one-on-one support that we can give to students and families to say, well, what would it look like if I took applied in grade 9 and college in grade 11 and 12? What does that impact for our pathways? And then if I change my mind, then what happens? So where do we see those bridge programs between our colleges and our universities? And so we spend a lot of time sitting with families and working them through different options and using my blueprint, which is our web-based platform, to come up with what are these different options and how might they look? And so that's just a little bit. I see Laura's got her hand up, so she might want to just jump in and add to what I've said.
Yeah, just to expand on what Nicole was saying, I mean, she spoke about it really well. But we really, that concept, I'm looking at, I pulled out my guide really quickly. It's on the back there. But I think through the resources that we've created and that we use when we're working in classrooms with grade 7 and 8 students, and we're in every single grade 7 and 8 classroom across the system, we really, those 3 statements of all students can be successful, success comes in many forms, and there are many pathways to success. That's in the header of my Google Classroom and all of the classes that I have. And it just really, every time I'm in front of a group of students, I try to bring examples from all of the different pathways: workplace, college, apprenticeship, university, and beyond. And I think also when we're working in our pathway planning software, like my blueprint, one of the things that I really like is that after they complete their Who Am I activities and go through those surveys, they're able to see their match results. So based on the information they've shared about their individual interests, goals, motivations, personality traits, learning styles, it'll match them with careers. And the initial match list is open to all pathways. So careers that you can get on the job training right out of high school, through the workplace, apprenticeship, college, and university. And when we're looking at those matches, we're talking about them all as like they're all equally valuable. And it's a really great chance for them to explore. They can also use the filters to check out what's available at each of the different pathways, and then look at the careers individually and not just as a pathway, and look and really get them to question and reflect on how it matches what they're good at and what they want to achieve in life, and what they're looking for. So I think those are some of the things, and those conversations are, I think the great thing about this program is that they're happening before high school. So I have several meetings over the next week with grade 7 students and their families where the certs have reached out and said, hey, we want to get these students thinking about grade 8, their next year, what's coming for them in high school. Can we sit down and can we start to explore some of these different pathway options and start talking about it as at the end of grade 7. So and at the beginning of grade 7 through all the way through till their grade 9 transition.
Thank you. Colin, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add, Kathy, you raised a really good point, and you gave name to a bias that exists in our system. And one of the pillars of our grade 9 inclusive programming is ideology. And so one of the things that we are striving to do is recognize the biases that have been unrecognized and that haven't necessarily been acted on that exist in our belief systems. As you said, to become an educator, to become a successful educator, that pathway to success takes you through university and post-secondary education. And so for many of us as educators, we have just, unconsciously aligned success to be that outcome. And what we are trying to do is get educators to recognize all of the biases and perspectives that they bring into the classroom, with the hopes that we become much more conscious about the labels that we use, the language that we use, and the connotations that have become attached to some of that language. So for example, when an educator says, that's an applied student, we want to say, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to call a student an applied student? And if there is a negative connotation there, we want to call that out. We want to address that. We want to shift that mindset because, as you said, sometimes the focus is on one stream over another because it matches what success looked like for us. And we have to recognize that those belief systems are going to inform our pedagogy. And that's why that very first pillar is looking at that ideology. And that also connects to different equity lenses as well, right? So being able to recognize the biases that I might bring into a classroom based on my lived experience, what I'm conscious of, what I've experienced, et cetera, and what I might not be as able to spot as it hasn't been a lived experience of myself, but something that might be very much a reality for my students. So that's why that first pillar is there, is to really address those biases and perspectives.
Thank you, Colin. Donna, it's been nice to see you have your hand up still. Go ahead.
Thank you. When I sit here on the SEAC, I generally talk about Durham College, but my competing priorities right now as a passionate educator has to speak. I even sent Andrew an email. When I'm listening to all of this, Kathy, what you said really resonated with me. To confess, I had taught for many years at the Faculty of Education, and I taught teachers. And the biggest thing that I always said to every post-secondary B.Ed student was that every student's pathway is eventually, hopefully, into the work world. That is where we're getting them. I made them as equal as I could. It might be right after high school. It might be after internships. It might be after med school. But everybody is eventually going to be a global citizen, we hope, and a good citizen. And so I definitely been teaching that for about 25 years at the Faculty of Ed. Having said that, is the Faculty of Ed, I know the curriculum there, and at the Faculty of Ed, hats off to the inclusive, I'm going to say it wrong, coaches, I believe, is the term. I have also taught at the ministry level, and so I understand what it's like to go and try to mentor and teach people and shifting perspectives and paradigms is your biggest obstacle. And hats off to all of you for doing this. Is anyone talking to the Faculty of Eds about the way in which they teach teachers? Because the K-8, they've been adapting, modifying, running 12 different programs at the same time. And as an ex-Grove teacher, I also taught at the high school, who also was teaching multiple levels within the same student. So, those are gifts that can be applied. And our post-secondary friends, for all of you sitting there, I got to teach from both panels. It is definitely different when you're doing this. So I love the concept. I worry about the implementation, and I know you have great plans, but getting it out there to everybody, I have concerns. And then my college hat comes on and says, because there's nothing wrong with college, I would like to tell everybody, it's a great place. And to confuse things more for all of you, we also have degree programs now. So you can now explain to me what that means for the student who's coming in. So it's not just about university and college now. When we talk on these streams, college now got confusing for everybody and is now doing degree programs. So I just wanted to add a few other things. And then my last thing is, so I'm Donna. I was in the grade 8 classroom, and I, in math, was modified by my wonderful grade 8 teacher by 2 years. And I was assessed at that modified level. And now I'm coming in and I hear all the great terms about how we're going to scaffold our learning and we're going to, get that student there. So what happens to my assessment in that grade 9 inclusive math classroom, even though everything else I'm going to, like my English class, I'm going to get an A, and I'm going to, I don't need it modified, but I do that math. So are we assessing at the level the students at? Because UDL doesn't always apply to assessments. So sorry, I'm just challenged because I used to teach all this. So I'm like wondering, where does that come in? I was going to be quiet, Andrea, and I couldn't help myself. So
no, I replied that they were great questions and needed to come into the space.
please don't be quiet. These are important questions. Do we have anybody who wants to address those?
I don't know if the student success team wants to talk about, as you carry through from planning to teaching, co-learning and assessment, any of the conversations that you have with educators. I think it largely in ed, we've got to look at our assessment practices, particularly at the secondary level. So for instance, and I see Michelle as a secondary P in practice nodding as well. So it's been interesting, right, with the pandemic, because we talk about the challenges and the gifts. One of the assets of the pandemic was the pause to final exams. And so now it's an interesting conversation as they start to come back into educational planning for next year, concurrent with inclusive design grade 9. What is the purpose of a final exam? And is it the exam test taking skills that are being tested, or is it the content and material? And is it, when it's the content, material, knowledge, and learning and thinking about that and integrating the knowledge, is the exam always for all subjects the best way to assess that, right? And so we've done a lot of cumulative, like final summative projects. I think there's been a lot of really rich conversations where kids have been engaged in reciprocal conversations with educators that are able to ask those different, prompting questions. Tell me more about that. How did you connect those things? And so I think there's a time and a place, but it's not across all courses. And so I think we've got a really great opportunity as the inclusive design grade 9 comes in and the courses get expanded that way. And we've got this kind of pause that got enacted on a practice that has a longstanding history to go, where are we doing that and when and for the purpose of what? And so I think we've got a lot to move. Elementary certainly isn't benign to needing that kind of conversation and thinking about that too. But I don't think there's that same 30% reliance on summative that exists in secondary. So we look at, conversations, observations, and product, and how do we start really enacting the triangle of assessment to move towards differentiation, and then even student voice and choice in that. But as I said, you've said it, Donna, really, really well too. There's a lot of really great philosophical and PLE principled design. Now we need to live it for our kids. And then in the middle of that, as Carolyn spoke to, there's educator training and opportunities for ongoing coaching conversations, because we're shifting practice. And I think it was spoken to well tonight too. The vast majority of educators, the school system worked for, because we've come through it and we've stayed in it, right? And there's a few that come back in and go, it didn't work for me, so I'm coming back in to change it for the kids that are like me. But there's a lot of educators that it worked for and we stayed in it. We often hear teachers retire and go, oh my gosh, this is the first September since I was 4 without a bell. That's interesting, right? And how we replicate that in classrooms. So I don't think we have a really good answer for you tonight. But I think we need to, you've shined the light on a couple things that we need to be able to articulate better in terms of some of the planning and conversations, because I think it's more grassroots and with individual teachers and practitioners and district support. But where are we going globally as a district? Very fair question.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Tara, I know you have another question, as I have a couple of questions, but we are very over time on this section. So what I'm going to suggest to Tara and to anybody else, including myself, who have further questions, that maybe we can email Andrea and she can source out the answers to those questions for us. Because I think this is a topic we could talk about for quite some time, because there's a lot of aspects to it that are really important for us to get right. I think my only comment that I have, wrapping it up is that hopefully there is a lot of follow-up that is happening and sort of conscious assessing how things are going, so that we're addressing issues as they arise for these kids. We are going to have to move on now to our open discussion period with respect to the SEAC survey. And I know that Andrea circulated, or sorry, Lisa circulated to us earlier a copy of that SEAC survey, sort of the link to that on SurveyMonkey to just sort of have some view on it. And if Chris and Chris Conley and Leslie Parsons, if you guys would like to talk about that, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you this evening. Really, we're here to listen. We're interested in your feedback on where this, what your thoughts are on the direction of the questions. I know that this was previously discussed at the last meeting, so we're certainly available as well to respond to questions if there are any.
Is it, Don, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just a technical issue is that once you look at the survey once, it doesn't allow you to go back in to look at the survey. So I went to go back in to do my questions for here and I couldn't.
Our apologies. We can change we can change that. I can see Leslie moving. She's changing it right now.
Changing the settings as we speak.
So you can go in and look at it right now.
Yeah, and so that was my suggestion, since I couldn't, maybe you wanted to just go through it just quickly on the screen, display it, and go through the survey just quickly for people to take a quick look at, so that we can then ask your questions.
Okay, Kathy, I see you have your hand up.
I just would suggest that some of the language that is special education language probably needs more clarification. I still have to ask the head of special ed about some of the terms like direct, indirect support. So unless I'm going to go and look up my child's IPRC, I probably won't be able to clarify that. And I know there's language about support team member that I'm not sure if you mean any staff or if you mean special education staff. And because yeah, I'm confused. I don't even know what that means for me to answer that honestly about my own child. So I would argue that that's probably, when we're asking about communication, do we mean by the special education team? I don't know what the question is implying, to be honest.
And I suppose I should start by saying that where we've started with this is we took the previous SEAC survey that had been administered historically. So there have been a lot of changes in the organization, particularly around language, and we'll work with the team to identify that and make those updates.
And I think it's something we're always trying to work on here too, Chris. So it's not a criticism of the survey, it's a criticism of how we all talk about everything, that it gets confusing for everyone who doesn't have the jargon.
Absolutely. We try to put it in the language that's accessible for those that we're hoping will participate. And we recognize that language can be an obstacle to participation for sure. Perhaps I'll scroll through. We are sharing this as being illustrative. It's not intended to be representative as a final document, but giving you an idea of the kinds of questions that we could ask, and we can certainly modify. My understanding is that this is to be an anonymous survey, which means that the information that you want the data summarized by needs to be included as a question. So since it's anonymous, it would not be possible to connect it to other information because we don't have that information to connect it with. So where you're interested in focusing in and having things summarized. So we're starting out here by grade division. So that would be one way we could take a look at the information across those various panels. We taking a look at the child's learning environment, and as you pointed out, needing to make it more accessible in terms of that language. And if there are any questions, please just jump in. I can't see the full range of
yeah, I can't either.
Okay.
I would like to point out, can you, at number 3, make a note to add for people to check all that apply, because many children have
yes,
more than
multiple
one.
choice.
Yeah, so people don't get confused to think they can only choose one.
Yes. We'll include that in the instructions, select all that apply.
Yeah.
We do have a question around whether or not it's important to look at the information by municipality or some level of geography. If that's not a concern, then we can certainly move on.
Eva, it's Donna. I really liked this question. I know in the past we were able to provide it so that we could provide it to administrators as well, so that they could focus on the families of schools. If we did it either by school or by municipality, and I'm just wondering if somebody might feel uncomfortable identifying the school, but they would be more likely to identify the municipality that the school is in. So I would like to see something like that.
I would actually like to see something like that as well, simply because I'm curious as to whether or not we, that a pattern would show up as far as how parents feel they're supported in one area or the other, depending on where they're located.
You'd be able to explore whether or not people are having the same experiences or different experiences based on where they're living.
Mm-hmm.
One consideration as well is how many people do you anticipate might participate? You want to have it large enough that you have enough people in summary, but if there are some communities that are smaller, then how many people might be participating, we could aggregate it together. I'm thinking particularly of the north, Brock, Uxbridge, and Scugog, either separately or together, is often used for reporting. But if we include each of those, we could take a look afterwards.
Yeah, I would think if you were to include those smaller areas, you need to group them together to sort of get a better idea. Otherwise, it would be very skewed, I would think, population-wise.
There is the option, though, that in red text was a couple of options. So there is the possibility of, instead of asking them to identify their municipality, we could create collectors by family of schools, and then the links would be given to the families in various family of schools, so that we would have the data already collected in separate buckets. Then we could combine them together, or we could keep them separate so that you would know geographically, in terms of their family of schools, where those results are coming from. So that's an option, rather than just adding another question.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how everybody else feels. I think the family of schools might be just an easier, logistically easier. But
yeah, and that wouldn't require the participants to supply that information. That would have to be delivered through the links. They would have to be given the link to their family of schools already defined. And so it takes the burden off the families to have to try and communicate, which school they're going to, or which municipality. But that would take some coordination in when they launch the survey. We'd have to coordinate to make sure that families are getting the correct link, if that was the option you wanted to choose.
Eva, Chris has pointed a comment too, in agreement with family of schools.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay.
Is there, sorry, Is there a question?
Kathy's
Or-
got her hand up.
Sorry, I'm just wondering.
Okay.
I'm just wondering with the family of schools, does that mean if I am from an exceptionality that is more rare that I will feel like I don't know that I'm getting a different survey, but I'm actually outing myself?
You wouldn't be getting a different survey. You'd be getting a link, and then the data would be collected. Like we do this for the school climate. We create collectors in which the data comes into. So if, for example, there was a family school and there was only 2 students or a family of students that replied, then we wouldn't use them. We would take their data out of their family of school collector and just have one data pool or one data set.
I think, Leslie, Kathy's comment, though, intersects what we're currently talking about with, say, question 3 for some of our kids that have lower incidence in terms of, like, if I'm replying for my child who has a learning disability or has autism, within every family of schools, there would be a fairly broad, even at like a 25, 30, or 40% response rate, I would still be masked within that anonymized data set. But if we're starting with a group of our students that has a much lower, say our students who are blind or low vision, who are geographically represented all over the board, but within a family of schools, there may only be 1 or 2 students. So the data would either be brushed out on the low end, like, or the anonymity is not at the same level for the family that we're putting out front as part of the survey.
We have suppression rules as well that we apply. So if there's fewer than 10 responses, then we don't include.
Enough.
We don't
I'm trying to listen. Enough.
If you have fewer than 10 responses as our standard suppression rule, those results are then withheld. So you get a less than 10. So we are sensitive to where there's smaller response rates, less participation or smaller numbers represented in a group. We apply the suppression rule. And then we look for other ways to include them in a larger summary. So where they may not be visible, where it may not surface in a family of school level summary, they would be included in the full report, the full board report.
And it would give you some flexibility because just because the data is collected into separate collectors does not mean it has to remain in those collectors. If the numbers are low, we collapse the collectors and they become all one data set. But if there was a particular service or support or program that was wide ranging, and then you wanted to know, how the experiences based on their family of schools, we can then expand again. But if we don't have some mechanism to indicate where they are located, then we wouldn't be able to do that. So this is just one option. Asking people by their municipality is another. It just, this option eliminates the question, so the parents or families don't have to answer that question. We'll already be collecting their data geographically.
Functionally, it's like pre-populating the question for everyone, for their families of schools, so that they don't need to enter it in for them, but we can still group them together by the other groups.
Okay.
And then the remaining questions, there are options, because it was communicated to me that families don't always have a lot of time to answer the questions and do the surveys. So I tried to give some options of where they can just select an option, but then there is the opportunity to comment if they wish to provide more information, so that pairing of just multiple choice with the option gives some flexibility to those that want to provide more information. They have the ability to do that.
Leslie, you have a question from Sensor Renab.
Yes, Sensor Renab, thank you.
Hi, very interesting topic. I just wanted to comment on us collecting information using the multiple links. Here in Inclusive Student Services and in the SEAC committee, we pride ourselves on transparency and openness. So if we are sharing different links, I would love it if there's a declaration that this information is being collected, even though they're not providing it, because it changes the anonymous factor just slightly for the participant who's taking place. So I just want us to remember transparency and openness.
Yes, we would be including a note as part of the preamble and the introduction. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very good point, Sensor Renab. Thank you. I also just noticed something on number 3 that I think is a bit of a thing. If we're allowing people to select more than one exceptionality, I noticed at the bottom we have multiple exceptionalities as one of the items, and I'm not sure how that sort of really fits in if you're selecting more than one. That already indicates multiple exceptionalities, right? You might put other if you want, or something to allow somebody to put in, like, as you know, I'm not sure that, or I'm sure there's many things that we haven't covered under here that would be considered disabilities. So I just wonder if that needs to be changed, because it seems to be a bit redundant if you're choosing more than one.
But Eva, I think we have a small class that was a multiple exceptionalities class, so maybe people would go by some of those definitions as well. I don't know.
If I can clarify that. So right now, those are the categories of exceptionality under Reg 180-198. So what's available in terms of review of placement and exceptionality. So not diagnoses, but the categories that you would see pop on an IPRC.
Mm-hmm.
And then the multiple exceptionalities where we have dual or three, right, for some of our kids.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with some of these. I struggle with things like, for example, behavior. So a child with anxiety is listed as behavior, right? Like a behavior disorder, when it's not really a behavior disorder.
So then it would be up to SEAC if you want to keep them bound by the regulation language, or which gives categories. So then from a data collection perspective, you've got kind of the buckets, right, that are defined by the ministry and by the regulation, and or the opposite is open-ended, but then it becomes more challenging to cluster the data, but an authentic representation of how a family or a child would like it gives an ability from an asset lens in how an individual would like to represent the fact that they receive special education supports and services and how they identify
the
community. So up to SEAC, but these are the kind of, when we look at, the 5 categories and then what are the subcategories, these are the subcategories that go into an IPRC.
Yeah, because I struggle with some. For example, like ADHD is not listed on here, and it typically gets put under behavior, but the majority of kids with ADHD, their supports are academic, not behavior. Correct. So, correct. And we know that it can be listed under whatever exceptionality their supports most is defined by. So, yeah, I think we need to take some look at this stuff. I think, this we received sort of, recently. I think it would be good if us as a SEAC members could go through this survey and make some points, because I think there's some things we might want to look at from a language perspective as well. Terry, I see you have your hand up.
Banana. Sorry. Hang on. Or someone decides to call me right when I start talking. Sorry, everybody. Do we even want to collect this information? In the past, what we had this gargantuanly long survey, and we go farther down, it starts talking about all the bits and pieces. And I think one of the things that we had sort of talked about reviving this conversation is, what information do we want to get out of the survey? Do we need to break down the responses and the information of our students by their diagnoses, and this whole conversation about that? Or do we just care that they're receiving services and support, and are they feeling supported or are they not? Regardless of their diagnoses, regardless of their issues, regardless of any challenge, is that really a question that we need to answer or ask? I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Like, do we care?
Yeah,
it's an option. So you just remove it completely, saying it would be interesting to remove it, to see what people would think about that.
Yeah,
so, well,
because I think
you didn't ask me what my child's diagnoses are, but is that relevant? Your child is your child, and your child is receiving services and support to be successful as a student.
Yeah.
Are they getting the support that they want? Like, what are the questions, what are the answers that we're trying to get from our parents, I guess, and that may tailor whether or not we ask any of these questions.
Yeah, I think our discussion last time was really around what we wanted to see was what information parents are receiving at the school, how involved they feel they are in the process, whether they feel their children are being supported well, and whether they feel that they're making progress. I mean, those are a lot of the things that we care about, right? How is the policies at the board, how are they trickling into the school? I think that was a large, and how parents feel about that. So you have a very good point. And that's, I think, partly why I think we need to go ahead and go through this and really ask ourselves, is this information on each question, what questions here do we really need, and what maybe would we want to see that isn't here?
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of the statisticians in all of us, I'm sure there's many of us, but we've had past members whose stats were their jam, and so a lot of these questions kind of came, and it was really interesting information for the answers that we got, that we could get that level of breakdown to see we have a really big gap with our LD students, or we have a really big issue. So there's some benefit to that from that perspective. But again, then you kind of get back to then, okay, do we need to make this language a little bit more?
Yeah, well, and then I think you don't worry about outing a student, geographically, when you're not asking what the identification is, but more focused on what the level of service is.
Yeah. So
I think that's really where our concern is what the level of service is for kids in the school, and how those families feel involved and communicated with and supported with their child on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And
are their voices being included in the decision making consistently? So.
Yeah, that's just kind of my thought. Like, maybe we strip back some of the, how do we classify everybody and all their stuff, back to this is, we're trying to get that process. Are we supported? Not that I don't care, but we, from the data collection perspective, the diagnosis is irrelevant. It's, are you supported?
Yeah. Kathy, and then Rowan.
I kind of am leaning towards cut this back, way back, and maybe at the end, if you're interested, tell us a little more about your child. Because at the end of the day, you're also hitting burnout. And when it's page 5 of 12 and all of that, you might just stop. Like, I don't know how many people quit the survey too. But if the first question is something I'm interested in telling you, how's communication going? Oh, you actually care about something I would like to discuss. And I love how we're saying, how is it? Don't necessarily like the way it's worded, but I love that box where people have an option to tell us more. I think that's brilliant. And maybe some of these questions get diverted if they've still engaged at the end and have the energy and aptitude and willingness to share a little bit more. I do think services look very different with some of our diagnoses. And so it's particularly powerful to know that, but I would rather hear exactly what Tara said.
How are we doing? What do we need to change?
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Rowan.
I think I agree with both Tara and Kathy. I think what I'm curious about from the, I guess I'm more of a statistician as well, but once we pare everything back and find out just in general, are your services being met? And we find out the answer is no. What do we do there? Do we basically look at everything and start everything from scratch? Or was the original design of this, and I don't know who designed it, to sort of pare down, okay, well, you know what, in terms of the autistic, children with autism, we're doing okay there. We haven't heard any negative feedback, but in terms of LD, okay, we're seeing some real difficulties there. So that's where we have to sort of target. Was that the original intent? But I'm weighing it out. My heart goes to what Kathy and Tara said, because that's where I agree, because you don't want to scare anyone away. But at the same time, once we get the data, what's the point of getting the data if we can't do anything with it? And if there is, what would we do with such a general information?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, I would think that we look at it as like, there's the areas we need, like, to see certain areas that maybe need to really have some work done on it, and sort of drill down is where the breakdowns are happening in the schools. But I do like Kathy's idea of putting something at the end with respect to, even the idea of sharing your child's identification if you choose to, right? Because I feel like for some families, they may be more reluctant than others to do so, right? And maybe we're going to get more, but at the end, when we get the answers to the real questions that we really want, and then allowing parents to have that ability to then choose to identify the identification or not.
And I think that, because I definitely like the idea at the end, I think we just have to phrase it in such a way that, something about, should you choose to, please provide the identification, as it will help us to further service, that particular department, so that they realize, okay, if I say something, at least they're going to be focusing on the department that's going to help my child, or something to that effect, as opposed to, I just don't want it to be so general that once it comes out, it's great, we got the data, but what are we doing with it? But I definitely see that if people feel like they have to show their cards, quote unquote, then they're going to be less inclined to write anything down.
Yeah, exactly. Kathy, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if, because this is about SEAC and us doing better to advocate, if we ask them, we could also, like, if we at the end, sort of in that closing, like, tell us a little, if you want, tell us a bit more about your child. Would you like to have a member of SEAC follow up with you?
Mm-hmm.
That might, like, if they tell us about the identification, it could help us try to put the right person in place, but we can divvy that up just to reach out to people, because a lot of the times it's probably a conversation for us to better understand. And most of us are representing associations where we hear from our members, but not every child who's deaf has a parent who's a member of Voice.
Mm-hmm.
So we have done that in the past, and we'd have to have a consent statement, because then they would no longer be anonymous if they were to be providing contact information. I'm a true believer in building off ramps for people who take the survey, and like in question 16 would be an example of one of those questions where they have the option: would you like to answer questions and provide feedback on their meeting? And they have the choice: yes, I would like to, or no, not at this time. And if they clicked not at this time, they would be moved on. So this is just, I wasn't really sure. I knew that you didn't want to use the previous survey questions. So this was kind of just my best guess. And a lot of this are repetitive questions, like it's style of questions. And we're seeking, direction and guidance from Siac as to what the questions, the wording of the questions. But we absolutely, want to build in as much flexibility and allow the participants to guide themselves through the survey and give them options. So there could be a question, would you like to tell us about, your child? And if they said yes, they would be taken to a separate question pathway to provide, descriptors about their child and their family circumstances. And if they said no, not at this time, they would be moved on. So it allows participants to choose the pace at which and the amount of questions they want to ask. I didn't put those questions in every section, but it can be done. And so if people only wanted to talk on the supports they received or only to speak to their communication, they could move quite quickly through. So the fact that it's presenting as 13 pages does not necessarily mean that people experience that length. I was trying to get just sort of a feel as to different ways to ask things, targeted. There's an option about what are the 3 things that are working well? What are the 3 things that are not working well? In terms of communication, that's a style of question. Then there is another style, which is kind of like a fill in the blank. So I would like my child support team to start fill in the blank so that we're not expecting people to have to write, unless they choose to, paragraphs of information. They can provide, as much or as little as they want on the topics that they want. And that way, if there's enough flexibility, those that are really invested in filling out surveys can spend half an hour filling out every aspect. If someone has only got 5 minutes, they should be able to move through this, if it's designed properly, in 5 minutes. And that's my goal.
In terms of the scope of surveys, we recommend that you keep it to the smallest number of questions possible. And you're only asking a question if it's helping you to understand something, and that understanding leads to action. If the understanding doesn't lead to action, it's something that you can do about it, then it's a curiosity question. And those are ones that we usually say, do you really need that one? And the nice to know, we like to set aside the nice to know. Wouldn't it be nice to know if we could find out? Well, maybe, but the shorter the survey, the more likely you'll get people to actually join in and then stick all the way through. So when you get past about 10, 15 questions, people start sort of disappearing. So yeah, the action item. My question is usually, once you know, what will you do?
Andrea, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think just important to clarify something between last meeting and this meeting. So I think where Siac was going when the survey first came up, we were just talking about, to Tara's point, about what do you want to get out of it in terms of the end, like what information. Last month you spoke around wanting to understand parents' sense of voice and communication within their kids' programs. Which anchors kind of as feedback to school. But I think one of the threads this evening was also feedback on Siac. So I think that's one thing that Siac, like as a committee, to be clear on. Are you getting feedback on programs and services or feedback on Siac? Just to make sure that Chris and Leslie kind of have that understanding as we move through. And then if there is, if team committee members can take a look at kind of the draft questions, not only for the kind of categories of what you'd want to know about, but as Leslie said, the different types of how we ask. That's really important direction for us to get from the committee as well.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, I think the feedback for Siac just more would be, letting parents know that that they can reach out to Siac members as opposed to a question that says, would you like a SEAC member to reach out to you, you could simply state, visit us at, this link if you want to
we
reach
can
out.
help close out the survey with that
Yeah,
kind of
with that type of information.
The SEAC page. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if I see this as in a PDF. You could send it. Is it possible if you could send us a PDF version that people could just sit and look at the whole survey in one go, and then we could make our comments and maybe bring this back for September discussion just to sort of really drill down on what we all think. Because September we should be back in person, and then we can do breakout groups and stuff that will make some of that a little bit easier.
Yes, we can definitely share the PDF. Just remind you that because there are some questions that will move you to different sections depending on how you answer, that if you go to the link, you get to experience that as a user of where you can dig in deeper or move to another section. Whereas the PDF will give you the full flow of every question that's included in it. But as Leslie mentioned, but may not be addressed by those.
But it'll give us both,
yeah, we
right?
can, absolutely.
Yeah, give us both for sure. And we can, that way we can kind of go through it because I'm just being mindful of time here. But I think that, I think maybe that's the thing, is to bring it over to our discussion period for September and have the opportunity for SEAC members to kind of go through the survey in detail and think about what it is we want to know and what we intend to do with it, right? What the action side of that is. So, okay. Okay, then moving on to business arising from the minutes from last month's meeting. Sorry. Thank you, Chris and Leslie, for putting this together for us. I know that's a lot of hard work, and we actually really appreciate all your help. Just so you know, we're still kind of going through that process of what we're looking at and looking for. So we really appreciate you guys stepping in and helping us with this.
Always happy to help, and we're happy to be flexible as well.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Association reports. I don't know if Kelly, we received a newsletter from the Association for Families with Children with Communication Disorders with a couple of attachments for summer language activities. And I don't know if Kelly wants to speak to that briefly.
Hi, yes. Sorry, you're talking about the handouts that were attached.
Yeah.
To the, so in that, I do believe that what was happening was the association was looking at ways to sort of keep going, and some parent volunteers and members have stepped in to try and help revitalize the association. But what they're really standing for and looking for is a way in which to keep communication services available to students. The concern is, one of the points that they were talking about is the separation of the language and the speech services as they're going through. Did you want me to expand on that? Sorry, I wasn't sure if that's, is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, no, I just sort of a general synopsis of sort of what was in the newsletter and that from the association's perspective.
Yeah, sure. So they were talking about, I'm just going to pull it up here and make sure that I have all the correct advice. So I have it here. So in the association newsletter, they talked about the May in Speech and Hearing Month and the communication, trying to get more parent involvement. And then that the parents did come to help and heed that call. They really wanted to, with respects to the communication, point out that listening, speaking, reading, and writing are all the factors of the communication, and the ways in which they are trying to advocate for that. And it lists out those ways. One of the ways in which they're advocating right now is what I had just mentioned about speech and language services being separate. So language services are done through the school board, where speech services are not, and that can be difficult because you'd have two different services. They also wanted the summer slump to they wanted to highlight that, and that was the second handout, which is the calendar to sort of try and give parents sort of a way in which they can help their kids with communication difficulties get through the summer slump, so there isn't that regression.
Perfect, thank you so much. Anybody have any questions with respect to the association report for Kelly? No? Okay, perfect, thank you. We'll move on then to correspondence that we received. Two of the items, which were the therapeutic recreation summer program was talked about earlier, as well as the Durham crisis line poster. So we have those that we can circulate to our associations. We also received the PAC on SEAC tip sheet for effective practices in recruitment for local associations. They sort of list a number of associations that you can look at. Each SEAC can have 12, I believe 12 associations. We currently sit at 8. So we could look, if we chose to reach out to some of the associations on this list and see if they have interest in putting forth representatives for SEAC. You know, if we wanted to do that, we do have space, you know, 4 seats, I believe. And then the other one is PAC on SEAC regarding special education funding 2022. And it's something I would definitely like to look at in greater detail, and possibly as throughout the year goes on, seeking to meet, especially when it comes to the funding discussions, making sure that we're meeting the timelines for that throughout the school year for those discussions. Does anybody have any, oh, and sorry, we also last minute received a communication from the Ottawa French Catholic Board regarding PPM 81. It wasn't translated, but I'm going to assume that it echoes much of what the other boards have issues they've previously raised. But we know that that's kind of been shelved currently, so that's good to hear. Does anybody have any questions or comments with respect to the information we received, or like for the correspondence that we received this month? Scott, go ahead.
Sorry, it wasn't, here I'm going. First I have to apologize for my dog, and she was barking, and I said stop, and I apologized to Chris while I was going. But secondly, this whole PAC on SEAC and training and stuff I started thinking about, and I know that we talked about a little bit about getting access to York Region's SEAC training. Have we followed up on that? It sort of just twigged my mind as it was the last thing we talked about, training, onboarding, and I'm thinking, you know, of the whole process again, you know, getting new members. So it just twigged my mind. Sorry if we actually followed up on that.
And thank you for the reminder. I think I sent the email, but didn't follow up on whether we received. I will loop back.
Yeah, it wasn't really that, but I just heard PAC on SEAC is very much good training, and that they have training available as well. So I just kind of twigged my thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I did some of that training through Easter sales way back when for the PAC on SEAC stuff. It is quite informative, especially for new members. It would be handy if we could get the links to those training sessions. Okay. Any thoughts on reaching out to any of the associations, or maybe want to discuss it in greater detail at our next meeting once people have a chance to actually, you know, to dig deeper into these two attachments, because I think they are a lot of important information for us, for SEAC members in general. So if you haven't had a chance to read them, I do recommend that you do. And maybe next meeting in September, we can discuss about whether or not we want to send out some feelers for some of these other associations that maybe we don't have representation for on our SEAC at the moment. Okay, if there's no questions or comments with respect to that, we'll move on to community concerns. Does anybody have any community concerns to bring forward currently? Oh, excellent. Okay, celebrations and successes. Does anybody have any celebrations or successes to share? Kathy?
I just need to share that my daughter's teacher of the deaf for the last 8 years is retiring. And so they had a little cry today, and they might have had a special donut. And it breaks my heart because I don't want to see her leave. But that's the shout out I needed to share when all of the retirees came out, because that's a special person.
That's a hard one for everybody. Congratulations to her, but it's hard. Rowan and then Tara.
Yes, just very quickly, it's the time of year that LEADR partners with DDSB for a the Ability Scholarship, and it's for learning disabilities students that basically get to learn, navigate, and see what the challenges in front of them and use the resources that are provided to move on to that next level. We only had 5 applicants, which is something we definitely have to work on. But it was very nice to be able to speak to the recipient. I don't know if I'm able to say her name here or the board, but she was very excited. Her mother also was very excited. You know, you ask them some questions, and you sort of see with again, as a person with a learning disability, it's very good to see them going, okay, I don't look at it the same way as I once did. You know, it's sort of a different way of learning, as opposed to, okay, this is terrible, I don't know what I'm going to do. And yeah, I always enjoy giving the good news, and they'll be presented on the board meeting on Monday, I believe. And yeah, it's exciting to see. And also, when, again, with respect to Learning Disability Association, when people start to see the resources and realize that there's another way, it's comforting. So I like to see that, and the changes that are being made. So that's it.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. Sorry, Tara, you were next.
Personal Adam story for anyone who is interested in Adam's life. We have reached a new goal, and independence has been achieved. He can actually open and close the front door by himself. Physical dexterity. We actually got a new front door, so we're all very excited about all of this. But he actually has the manual dexterity because the door actually works properly, that he can now get himself on and off the bus without me having to be there to make sure that he can open the door. So it's like, he's so stoked about it. I'm super stoked about it because it's just one more thing that he can do on his own, and it's fantastic. So that's just it. It's so small, but you know, it's not that, but for us it was a pretty big deal this week. So just had to share.
Yeah, literally just open doors for him, right?
Literally and figuratively, yes, exactly.
Fantastic, really. Good for Adam.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Carolyn, go ahead.
This week, Durham College returned to having their convocations in person after delaying it. So my son graduated in 2021, but they actually finally were able to have their convocation this week. So that was a huge thing to, again, see everybody in person, see the teachers, the students, and just celebrate everybody's accomplishments, having, gotten their diplomas in the middle of a pandemic.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm glad he got to do that because I think a lot of students have missed that rite of passage. So that's fantastic. Anybody else? Donna, go ahead.
Just to follow up on that, I was so pleased to be able to attend in person. One, definitely the retirement event for our teachers and to see that, but also I attended a transition event for Ajax High School, Queen on the Rise, which basically was for female students and focused on basically introduction to the high school, but also STEM activities and getting them thinking about different various options and career options still as well, and what can happen. We had a variety of speakers. It was so great to see students, so great to see teachers involved in it, as well, as far as, you know, just the whole interaction and getting them familiar with what they can expect in high school. So it was great to be in person and see the kids and see the smiles and see the interaction. It was phenomenal.
Oh, that's fantastic. Anybody else? No? Okay, well, I have celebration success, a little bit sad at the same time. My youngest is graduating grade 12, moving on to Guelph as well next year in the Fine Arts Studio program at Guelph. And so a couple weeks ago, I attended my final SEC meeting of my kids' school career. I've been on the SECs from pretty much the time they were in kindergarten, right on through. So it's a bit bittersweet. I'm not sure how I'm old enough to have 2 adult children, but apparently I am. I live in denial a lot. But there you have, so, you know, it's exciting times. It's a bit crazy times, but yeah, we're moving on. So yeah, thank you. All right, so if we have no more celebrations and successes, our next SEAC meeting is September 15th, 2022. And at this point, it's expected to be in person back at the board offices again. And I really look forward to seeing all of the older faces and really looking forward to meeting our newest members. That's going to be fantastic. Motion to adjourn. Tara, seconded. We're on, all in favor. Have a fantastic summer, everybody. Thank you for coming out.
Have a wonderful summer, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great summer. Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.